Sean Gilyard. I'm an assistant professor of economics at Coastal Carolina University. Today, I'm going to be presenting my research on consumer budgeting around bill payments. So, bill payments are a commitment for consumers. When a consumer makes a bill payment, what they're doing is they're committing to past or future consumption all at once, which is represented by the graph there. You could think of that as rent or a utility bill, where you're consuming your rent over the entire month, but you have to pay for it all at once. And this can be difficult for consumers to manage their budget around, especially when they're liquidity constrained. Now, as of to date, there isn't a lot of research on bill payments, and that's mainly because our consumption models in economics rely on low frequency data. And this is a high frequency data question. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has found that 30% of consumers in 2022 were struggling to pay with bills, at least one bill, and 90% of these consumers reported facing recurring difficulties. So it's very important for consumers to understand this behavior. So in this study, what I do is I study how consumers manage their budget around bill payments using a survey from the UAS. Specifically, I'm going to introduce some new characteristics about the timing of bill payments with that representative sample, a comprehensive sample of bill payments. And then I also look at how consumers adjust their normal spending around bill payments. And I find that consumers are increasing their non-bill purchases after a bill payment has been made. Specifically, conditional how much liquidity, that is money they have in their wallet and in the bank account, I find that consumers are increasing their spending 41 to 51% above their average than they were spending before the bill payment was made. And I'm finding evidence that this is a purposeful budgeting decision by consumers, as when consumers have more liquidity, they don't show this behavior. That is, consumers are reducing their spending before the bill payment comes, and then they increase their spending again. Because it's lower liquidity, it's suggesting that consumers who don't have this liquidity are having to reduce their spending until they make the bill payment. I also find that this is higher over longer pay cycles where there's less liquidity injections over like a monthly pay cycle compared to weekly. And I find that it's not true for automatically paid bills where those consumers tend to adopt those bills because they have a lot of liquidity. So I'm going to be using the survey of consumer payment choice and the diary of consumer payment choice implemented by the Atlanta Fed, which is the UAS sampling frame. So the survey goes from 2008 to present, and the diary started in 2012 and goes from 2016 until present. In my study, I'm going to be using the 2016 through 2020 survey and diaries. So what the survey and the diary data is about is tracking representative payment behavior of consumers. And bills are payments, so this is a perfect data set for me to analyze how consumers are managing their bill payments. Specifically, how it works is each year, the consumers are invited to take the survey, which is in September. And this is a recall-based survey where consumers are asked about their payment behavior for the prior year. For example, what type of payment instruments did you adopt? In a typical month, how much do you pay like in cash versus credit card, and things of that nature. However, after the survey, consumers are then asked if they would like to join the diary in October. And in this diary, consumers for 3 consecutive days track essentially all cash inflows and outflows of their bank accounts. And specifically, over the 3 days, they keep track of any payments they make, any income they receive, some account balances like their checking account, over those 3 days. And I can also see when they get their next and last income payments. So this is perfect for me understanding how consumers over a 3-day period are actually spending. Now, because it's only 3 consecutive days, consumers are put into waves as which 3 consecutive days within October they actually spend. And that's the bottom figure there. And as you could see, it's kind of a staircase implementation, so that throughout the entire month of October, there are always people taking the diary together. So I actually identify bills through the questionnaire, where the questionnaire will ask consumers after they report a payment, is this payment you made a bill payment? Now that's pretty broad in the sense that bill payments could be a payment for any consumption or service that you received in the future or the past. And you can see different types of bills on screen. After they're asked if it's a payment, they're asked follow-up questions like the due date, the frequency of the bill, was it automatically drawn from your account, and if the payment is same each recurrence. And so I'm going to define in my study bill expenditures as any expenditure that follows under this category of bill payments, though I do look at more in the appendix. And then non-bill expenditure is anything that isn't spending on a bill. So first, I'm going to present some characteristics of bills. So looking from 2016 through 2020 of the diarist, how much they spent on bills, altogether there's about 11,700 bills in the diaries rounded up over those 4 years. And I present some characteristics on the bills based on the regularity, the timing, the type, and if it was automatic. And on the right, I present demographics of the consumers who are making these types of bill payments. So from the table, you could see that most bill payments are regular monthly bills, about 72% of them. And most bills, surprisingly, are paid early. About 43% of bills are paid earlier than they were actually due. Additionally, 70% of the bills are manually paid. That is, a consumer will go in and make a bill payment on like rent or utilities, compared to 30% are automatically, they set it up for automatic removal from their account. Now, I want to point out with the demographics, it's usually pretty much the same across all these different bills. However, those consumers who are setting up automatic bill payments tend to have higher liquidity, where that's the amount of checks, amount they have in their checking account and cash and wallet, as well as they have higher income and net worth. The graph on the right shows each day of the diary where the years are concatenated of total expenditures, what share of them are bills. We could see the number, which is the top graph, shows that by number, bills are only about 20% of consumers' average daily spending. These are 20% of their expenditures are a bill. However, when we look at by value, we can see that can jump up on some days to almost 80%, right? So they're not paid very often, these bill payments, but when they're paid, they're really high value, emphasizing that commitment aspect of bills. I also plot the distribution of payment date versus due date of these bills over the month of October. And we could see in October, the days on the left, that the due date is pretty uniform across the month with some spikes, but the payment date is downward sloping. That is, consumers are choosing to pay earlier the month and then reduce that payment over time. And when I calculate the difference between the due date and the payment date on the right, where negative values is how many days early, we could see many consumers are paying bill payments early, but the most frequent is that people are paying their bills on the day of. Like, of all the days, that is the most frequent, the mode, right? And then there are 10% of consumers are paying late. I'm going to skip this slide for the sake of time, but next what I do is I look at how consumers are spending around bill payments. How might they be adjusting, if at all, their non-bill spending? And so what I do, just to keep it simple, is I run an event study analysis where I look at how consumers are spending non-bill expenditures against a set of indicator variables for the day of the bill payment. And this will be comparing how consumers are spending when they make a bill payment relative to how they were spending before they made the bill payment. And I'm going to control for the consumer's liquidity, that is how much money they have in their bank account, as well as they had a payday or not, just to make sure I'm not picking up on any possible increases in spending from income payments. And I control for respondent fixed effects as well as some time fixed effects. Last thing I want to say on this screen is note, X is measured as, on any given day, the amount of non-bill spending divided by the consumer's average spending. So I'm looking at their deviations from their average spending. Did they spend more or less than average on the day they paid a bill? And what I find here, this is my main table in my paper. My results show in the first column that on the day of a bill payment, consumers increased their non-bill expenditures by 16% above average. So the consumers make a bill payment, and then compared to what they were doing before the bill payment, they end up spending more. That is, they didn't have as much spending before the bill payment, increases afterwards. When I include liquidity in the second column, we see that magnitude increases. That is to say, consumers are spending 41 to 51% above average on those days, but the interaction term with liquidity is negative. When consumers have more money before they make the bill payment, they're not doing this as much. They're not adjusting their spending, suggesting that it's a budgeting behavior. For the sake of time, some other results I have here too is that non-bill expenditures are not seen for the most non-durable payments. That is, it's not seen for food or services expenditures. Consumers aren't postponing these expenditures. They're postponing more durable expenditures, which corresponds to a model of Browning and Crossley that says consumers are able to postpone the non-essentials, which I'm finding is happening here. Consumers don't show this when they are paying it early. They only show this adjustment that is reducing their spending until they make the bill. For bills that are paid on time or paid late, and automatic bill payers are showing this while manual bill payers are showing this while automatic bill payers are not. That's primarily because I'm finding these automatic bill payers have a lot of liquidity where they don't need to budget like this. So in general, in conclusion, what I'm finding is that some consumers who have low liquidity need to make sure they have enough money to pay the bill. And so they reduce their spending until they make the bill payment. After they make the bill payment, they go back to their normal spending. The implications of my study is for consumers, it's important for them to align their income payments with their bill payments. Really low cost policy improvement is align stimulus packages on the first day of the month when consumers are paying bills. That's all the time I have. Thank you.